Hi everyone, and welcome to another in my series of craft videos, short little snippets on various areas of writing craft. Today I want to talk a little bit about beginnings, middles, and ends. And that is because stories, like life, have them. They can't go on forever, just like life can't. Also, I've been thinking about this because Jennifer and I are planning the next masterclass for our Birth Your Truest Story workshop series, which will be on April 3rd. And we are going to be talking about beginnings, middles, and ends, as well as your character's arc through the story. So for me, the process of writing a story, writing a book, is really about discovery. And that means that I begin usually without knowing where I'm going. Some writers don't do it this way. Some have a very clear idea when they begin of where they're going. But I write to discover. And if you're like that as a writer, I wanted to reassure you that this is fine. However, it raises the question of where to begin. And I want to make this distinction because for the first draft, you really need to begin wherever you can. If you're a fiction writer, this might mean starting with just a glimpse of a fascinating character or an image or a situation. If you are a memoir writer, maybe it's starting with one of those memories that just won't leave you alone. It just keeps coming back and coming back. And the trick is to recognize that this writing starting point for your first draft will not necessarily be the beginning of your book. And that there is a process involved once you've got that first draft in trying to figure out where does the book begin and end and how do you get there. And I believe that this part of the process takes a little bit more thinking and analysis maybe than the generative creative writing part. But I do believe it benefits from that same creative energy. If you can bring that same listening to internal logic, kind of being in conversation with your book, really getting into the rhythm of the writing when you are discovering that narrative arc and the shape, that can be really helpful. Now, there are some traditional ways to go about this. For example, you might look at a traditional character arc and identify what we often refer to as the inciting incident. That is the event or force that jolts your character out of that ordinary world that existed up until the book begins. And sometimes that is the place to begin, with that jolt of that incident. But whether or not you use a traditional narrative shape or not, I think the most important element of any story and any character's arc is change. So something has to be different from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, the beginning of the story to the end. And it has to be something that's very closely tied to that character and who they are and what their problem is, what they desire. So once you have identified what that event or inciting incident might be, you can start to think about how your character, or you, if you're writing memoir, responds to that. How is it going to affect them? And as you move further into the story, there will be more events that will complicate that response, or as we like to say in the writing biz and the film biz, raise the stakes. I'm not a fan of throwing random events at your character to complicate things, but I think the best complications are those, again, that are really inextricably tied to who the character is. And by doing this, by raising those stakes, by adding those complications, you avoid that terrible sagging middle that we so often fall into when you've got the initial excitement over with, but you're not quite at the end, and things just sort of seem to float away, and that becomes boring for you as the writer, boring for the reader. The last thing I want to point out is that you may need to go through quite a number of drafts to figure out where your story is going. And that's okay too. Sometimes I think about it like a maze. When you start out in a maze, you may go down one path and hit a dead end, and you have to turn around and go back. And then you might find that the starting place isn't even where you thought you would start. You have to go around to a different starting place. And in several of my novels, the first chapter of the published book was definitely not the first chapter that was in my first draft. And I did have to start in a different place. And again, that's okay. It's part of the challenge. And if we let it be, it's part of the fun, moving back and forth between that generating process and the shaping process and kind of letting each one inform the other. So I'll leave you with the most important thing. And that is simply begin. Because if there's one thing I know for sure, you cannot get to the end if you don't start. So Jennifer and I do hope to see you on April 3rd for our masterclass. I put the information in the description below. Appropriately, we're calling it Where is Your Story Going? And we'll have some real fun, I hope, with some writing prompts that will help you uncover some of the arcs in your story and get that sense of movement going. Until next time, enjoy your writing. Thanks.